President of the International Peace Institute, Terry Rhodes Larson, and my colleagues, I would very much like to welcome all of you to this meeting on stabilizing Somalia with the Special Representative of the Secretary General for Somalia, Ambassador Augustine Mahiga. This is part of IPI's series of meetings with SRSGs, which has previously included discussions on Cote d'Ivoire, Liberia, and the Democratic Republic of the Congo. It's a really very great pleasure to welcome Ambassador Mahiga here at IPI. In his previous position, he, as the permanent representative of Tanzania from 2003 to 2010, became both a great supporter of the IPI Africa program as well as a personal friend. And it's just wonderful to have you here with us today. Ambassador Mahiga's distinguished career, in addition to his work here at the UN, has included assignments for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, as coordinator of the Refugee Emergency Operation for the Great Lakes in the mid-90s, as well as assignments in India, Italy, Malta, and the Holy See. As an academic, he has taught international affairs and regional cooperation at the University of Dar es Salaam. And all this background explains why the Secretary General selected Ambassador Mahiga for the very challenging task of seeking to achieve the stabilization and reconstruction of the Somali state. As we are all very aware, Somalia's government collapsed 20 years ago as President Mohammed Siad Barre, faced with chaos and an advancing insurgency, fled from Mogadishu in January 1991. Civil war engulfed the country. The capital was heavily destroyed. A famine crisis in southern Somalia, not dissimilar from the present one. Photos are just identical. We're just 20 years later. Was the immediate consequence of protracted conflict and economic collapse. 3 United Nations peace operations from 1992 to 1995 sought valiantly to alleviate the humanitarian crisis and rebuild the state. After complex events with which you are broadly familiar, and I'm not going to recapitulate them for you, United Nations peacekeeping forces were withdrawn from Somalia. That was 16 years ago. To its credit, the African Union mission in Somalia has sought since 2007 to stabilize the security situation and to face the challenge from al-Shabaab to the transitional federal government. But it has been the role and responsibility of the special representative to seek a long-absent, durable political solution to the protracted crisis in the country. And I would add that this is an issue, the search for a durable political solution, that has been largely missing, almost totally missing, from the American and international media coverage, which always just focuses on the immediate famine crisis. It doesn't talk about this. The Security Council last Wednesday, Ambassador Mahiga offered grounds for some optimism that a new moment for stabilization and coming together of the main Somali political forces may be at hand. The game has changed, I think, as your remark in the Council. The UN and you personally are very much at the forefront of this effort. So let me congratulate you for all you have done to arrive at this moment. And we're all looking forward to hearing your views, and I really thank you in advance for sharing your insights with us. So Ambassador Mahiga will talk for 25 minutes. We'll then have an opportunity for a Q&A, and I turn the floor over to you.
All of you. John, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. So nice to come back to New York, to see so many familiar faces, many friends and colleagues I've worked with, and of course to have a platform here at the Institute, which has been one of my favorite places during the 7 years I was permanent representative of Tanzania to the United Nations. This afternoon, I want to share with you a positive message, but I don't want to be overly optimistic, but realistic. Somalia is at a crossroad which presents an opportunity for stabilizing that country as it enters the 21st year of instability and without a central government. There are three main developments which make me optimistic. They are interwoven and interrelated. The first one is there is a new opportunity of a more inclusive political process, which is unfolding in a manner that has never unfolded before. I shall elaborate on that. The second is that the security situation in Mogadishu and Somalia is better today than it has ever been in the past 21 years. The third is an irony. There is an unprecedented famine where the drought in the Horn of Africa has developed into a famine in the Horn of Africa, but not in other countries except in Somalia, and in the area predominantly controlled by the Al-Shabaab. The famine is a tragedy. But the famine has given an opportunity that feeds positively on the political process and on the security situation. First of all, because it refocuses attention on Somalia. As you said, there is not much attention. Secondly, because the famine has contributed to the weakening of the Al-Shabaab, and that helps on the area of security. Why do I think this is a positive trend, which has never presented itself before than now? Let me briefly give you a historical perspective on the Somalia crisis. Somalia is the only raging conflict in sub-Saharan Africa that has continued unabated, and after a solution in southern Sudan, which went on for over 22 years, this is the longest running conflict in sub-Saharan Africa. If you include South Africa, it is the second. But South Africa's solution was found after 50 years. So I'm equally optimistic a solution can be found for Somalia. But Somalia has reached the stage where it is because collectively in the international community, we haven't given the attention it deserves. You have correctly pointed out that after the collapse of the military regime of Siad Barre and his flight from Somalia, there was an effort by the international community. It wasn't strictly a United Nations peacekeeping force, but it was a multinational force sanctioned by the United Nations, consisting up to 47,000 troops led by the United States. The primary purpose was to address a humanitarian situation. There was famine then, but it wasn't as bad as it is today. The political agenda was relegated in the background. But that effort by the multinational force to bring assistance and relief to Somalia ended in a fiasco. Firstly, because the emphasis was on humanitarian, well placed, but it forgot to address the political. After the downing of the Black Hawk, literally, that multinational force left, actually left in disarray. And the whole world neglected Somalia. The famine was not addressed satisfactorily, the politics was not even touched. If anything, that presence complicated the politics of Somalia by creating resentment and alienation of the Somali people from the rest of the international community. So it was a negative development. The world left, the Somalis said go, and they were left on their own devices. That neglect was fatal, because the raging civil war, dominated by warlords, degenerated into three dangerous phenomena. One is that warlordism intensified and literally split the country and accentuated what doesn't exist anywhere in Africa, clans. Academics here and politicians and diplomats are familiar with analyzing African conflicts in terms of ethnicity, regionalism, religion. But Somalia stands as a country, until you get into it, with one religion, with one language, and one culture. But beneath it, there is clanism, which is far deep-rooted than any ethnic divisions or regional divisions I've seen in Africa. Little did I know that clanism would be such a divisive factor in a situation of political vacuum as it was. So the civil war did feed on the clanism. And the warlords, that was a unique phenomena in African conflicts. But secondly, that neglect created a vacuum at a time when international terrorism was festering. In Afghanistan, in Iraq, in Pakistan, and everywhere. And this was an opportunity for the jihadist agenda to look for a foothold and a bridgehead in Africa. Here was the opportunity in Africa. The 1998 bombing of Dar es Salaam and Nairobi was maybe running trials by international terrorism, organized from Mogadishu, but that was the beginning. And it was a fertile ground. And that has continued unabated until the first signs of defeat on the 6th of August when Shabab withdrew from Mogadishu. But I'll explain that also. The third manifestation of that neglect was that the conflict festered, continued, and has taken another manifestation, international piracy, which nobody really took seriously in the world security discourse, except in novels and history books of Long John Silver and others. But now it has come back in vengeance, with vengeance in Somalia. All this due to the neglect. The famine petted off, but there was no political solution. It was IGAD, the Intergovernmental Authority for Development, and the African Union that began to pick the pieces of neglect and see what could be done. As late as 2005 and 2006, I remember leading Tanzania in the Security Council. When the agenda was 2/3 Africa, Somalia received very little attention. At most, there could be a press statement, not even a presidential statement, let alone a resolution. It was only later that we started with the international contact that attention has begun. Now, this neglect is something that we need to address. The UN came fortunately. And the Somalis also tried to put something together. But whatever the Somalis did, it was to bring together warring factions. If it wasn't the warlords, it was the regional clan leaders who were fighting. And the Mbagati process in Nairobi was one of the efforts by the Somalis that went on for 2.5 years to cobble together some kind of an agreement among the Somalis. They gave themselves 5 years with a transitional charter and some institutions and some transitional tasks, and they hoped in 5 years there could be stability. But it was an agreement among warring factions, among warlords. The parliament that was formed spent 2 years in Nairobi before it moved to Somalia. The vacuum continued. The Islamic courts established some semblance. But indeed, it was another conflict between the so-called transitional government and the Islamic courts that eventually led to the intervention by Ethiopia, and there was another crisis. The UN established the political office, not in Mogadishu, but in Nairobi, where it still is. And there was another effort. In 2008, the Djibouti Agreement. But this, again, was an agreement between the ARS, the Alliance for the Liberation of Somalia, which was the Islamic courts in exile, and the transitional federal government. But many important actors were left out. It gave itself 2 years, plus the 5 years, 7 years, which were ending in July this year, and nothing had been achieved. In that period, there were 15 attempts to form government. They all failed. Even when the transitional federal government was established in Mogadishu, it was only a few blocks in Mogadishu. When I took over in August last year, I ran deep into another crisis. This was between the president and the prime minister. So my first assignment was to reconcile the president and the prime minister. The government of that prime minister fell. So we had to form another government. And I said, I'm beginning on a clean slate. I have a government. Let's get moving. We have 9 months before the end of the transition in July. I was optimistic. But then a new crisis developed between not the prime minister and the president, but the president and the speaker. For 6 months, there was total paralysis. The speaker and the president couldn't even establish eye contact. Time was ticking. July is the end of the transition. Mr. Mahiga, do something. The Security Council came to Nairobi on the 25th of August. Do something. I said, what is the something? Get them to talk and resolve on how to end the transition. The dispute was whether to have elections in that July to finish the transition or to extend the period by 1 year. I tried with the help of President Museveni, and we got what we call the Kampala Accord. This was an agreement between the Speaker and the President to break the political impasse, and they started talking. But the price of that was two. One was we need a new government, because the new prime minister had failed politically to bridge the gap between the executive and the legislature. In fact, he was one of those who said, let us dismiss parliament and Parliament was saying we are going to impeach the government. And we are heading to a situation where we are going to have two governments in Mogadishu. A government of President Sharif that refuses to leave, a government by Parliament that was going to be elected. And what do? We succeeded to make them talk, and we postponed or deferred the elections and gave ourselves 1 year. But in that change of government, there was another positive thing. We have agreed on a roadmap. What do we do in these 12 months? The transitional tasks that were never accomplished before now have to be distilled from 18 to 4. And let us make sure that this roadmap, this time around, is not just between factions, but it's signed by the people and the major stakeholders of the political process. This is the significance of the roadmap, which was signed on the 6th of September, not in Djibouti, not in Bagati, but in Mogadishu, for the first time in 20 years. And the signatories was not only Parliament and the executive, but regional entities as well. And we are bringing in the process the civil society. It is a Somali-owned process that is representative, with a focus on 4 main areas: security, constitution making, political outreach and reconciliation, and good governance and governance. But the importance of this, unlike Bagati or Djibouti, is that it is all-inclusive. In the 20 years, there is a groundswell among the Somalis of demanding the end of transition and the participation in politics. The diaspora is a generation old, with professionals and well-organized. It is part of that groundswell. The leadership, as expressed by the Kampala Accord, knows now it cannot procrastinate. So the convergence of a Somali groundswell and a realization by the leadership is what is captured in the roadmap. And that's why, to me, that is optimism. What is the second source of optimism? It is the security situation. For the first time, Mogadishu is no longer 2 blocks or 3 blocks controlled by the TFG. It is 95%. The 5% are really pockets of the Shabab who didn't withdraw on the 6th of August because they come from Mogadishu. And the AMISOM is very optimistic that it is a mopping up operation that can secure the rest of Mogadishu in a few weeks. Of course, if the remaining 3,000 troops are deployed, and that's the message I conveyed to the Security Council, and deployed expeditiously. But it's not only Mogadishu that has been secured. There is a swath of territory from central to western and southern Somalia, bordering Kenya and Ethiopia, which has been secured by militias allied to the TFG. These developments spell optimism as well. Why did the Shabab withdraw? The war that has been going on in Mogadishu has been a conventional warfare. AMISOM deployment was literally a bridgehead in the true sense of the military word. Not even a block landed at the airport and at the port. And they have been fighting, inching forward in a war of attrition. Chapter 7, flexible rules of engagement, but frankly, that has been peace enforcement. The TFG has been training its troops, getting close to 10,000, but you train them with the help of the European Union in Bihanga or in Kenya or in Ethiopia. Literally, you bring these boys straight from the training camps to the front line. They have no command, they have no control, they have no initiation, whatever. Everything is on the front line, and that war is being going on. Shabab has been well-resourced. The hardened fighters of jihad, all the way from Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Yemen, my friend, ambassador, not sponsored by the government, but from all over, even the US, Canada, Scandinavian, Somalis fighting because they're jihadists. They have resources. After they withdrew, some of the arsenals that were left behind are just mind-boggling how powerful they were. But AMISOM has driven them out. Where are they? They're still in Somalia. But certainly, tactics are going to change, but the conventional warfare has produced results. So that is the second source of optimism. The Shabab is itself, leadership is in disarray. The money that they used to get from the Middle East, the Arab Spring has undermined those sources in various ways. The famine has eroded whatever control they had. If the population is not dead or dying, it has walked away from them. It has no population, and they have divided among themselves on how to approach this issue. So that is another opportunity. The humanitarian, as I said, too late, too little, but it's coming. We need to keep world attention for another 6 months. But there is an opportunity in that this world attention, coupled with these positive developments and the weakening of Shabab, can be galvanized and capitalized on something positive. This is the message I brought to the Council. We are going to have a meeting here on the 23rd, a mini summit. We want to have a common position to support the roadmap, to mobilize efforts to support AMISOM, to mobilize resources for the humanitarian effort. And that's why I think, cautiously, that we have reached a stage where there is an opportunity which has never existed in the past 21 years. But there are also challenges ahead and difficult times which can only be jointly overcome if we work together and the attention on Somalia continues. Let me stop here. I'm sure I'll answer more questions and clarify more issues. Thank you, John.
Well, thank you, Augustine, very much. And this is a very different message from the one that we certainly read about in the newspapers and the media coverage. We're going to open the floor to questions. I would like to, we're streaming this, which means that we are putting it on our own webpage. And therefore, I've been asked to ask all of you who are going to ask some questions to hold the microphone close to your mouth rather than waving it around or whatever else you might be inspired to do. And what I would like to do is take perhaps 3 questions at a time, and then we'll come back to Ambassador Mahiga so that we get as many of you as would like to take part an opportunity. And if you could kind of ask a question rather than make a speech, that would also be a terrific plus here. So, Ambassador, please, and introduce yourselves, although many of you know everybody in the room. Ambassador.
Thank you very much. I think Augustine does not know I'm no longer the ambassador of Yemen.
I didn't know.
No, okay. But in any case, I just want to second your argument that there are Yemenis in Somalia. But in this last battle in the province of Abiyan in South Yemen, we captured Somalis who are from Shabab. So the relationship between the two, I think you have to pay attention to. There is a lot of exchange of assistance between. My only question, Augustine, is you spoke very optimistically. And, you know, I follow Somalia quite well. We are always having optimism, but the reversals come very soon after that. I remember during the Islamic courts, which controlled piracy, And then I think it was a mistake, my personal view, that they were toppled. And incidentally, the leaders of the Islamic course are the ones who are ruling today in Mogadishu. But aren't you afraid of a reversal in Somalia?
So let's take Francis, please.
Well, thank you very much for a very clear, lucid message. Let me say that I share your inclination to be optimistic, because optimism is a very important tool for action as long as it is not blind optimism. Pessimism leads to dead end. Now, John, this is not going to be a speech. It's preceding a question. Now, we know that in Africa, most of our systems of governance are really from outside, constitutions, constitutionalism, institutions, all of that. And that is probably one of the reasons why they have not always been very effective. We have in Somalia the fact that after all this assumption of homogeneity being a source for unity and strength, we discovered, as you correctly said, that clan divisions could be even more profound. Quarrels within the family can be much worse than quarrels with strangers. And that is why, as you say, it has been so bad. But at the same time, because clanism became more or less the centerpiece, people thought that in Somalia we might have the first African state that was grounded on its own cultural institutions and values. And you could even say that this seems to be the case in Somaliland. We didn't figure in your presentation. Why is Somaliland succeeding to the point where clan system is being used effectively to govern from the grassroots, and Somalia is not succeeding? What is the value of the possibility of building on the clan system to have a genuine, culturally based African system in Somalia?
Excellent question. I'm going to take this gentleman here, and then Warren will come back. Please say your name. This was, all of you know Francis Deng, but I wanted to make sure you all know that Francis was speaking here with that question. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you. I'm David Tereshchuk from the Media Beat, one less negative part of the media than perhaps you were referring to earlier. But thank you for that very clear exposition of, I guess, realistic optimism. I was intrigued when you were explaining the overall context, and you drew in, of course, the unavoidable mentions of international terrorism and the bombings in Dar and Nairobi. I'm wondering, although I know your prime concern is stability and good governance for Somalia itself, I'm just wondering if your optimism extends to the international field, and whether international security is now less threatened by al-Shabaab because of what you were saying.
Okay, so let's go back, please. And then we'll have a couple of more rounds, please. Okay.
Why is this process different from the others, and hopefully won't reverse? I have really three explanations. One is that it is an inclusive undertaking by the major stakeholders. And this is an insurance that it is a Somali-owned process. The key players, like the regions, were left out, but that is where viability is. And they are proven to be viable, and they are great players in Somali politics. The civil society before was left out. And who are the civil society? Elders, religious leaders, business community, the diaspora, women. They have always been left out in the politics. In the roadmap, I've endeavored, we have endeavored, they have endeavored to include these elements. So inclusiveness, and we should try to maintain this inclusiveness. In the run-up to the Mogadishu conference, we had to do a major initiative to bring Puntland president and the Mogadishu Sheikh Sharif to talk and visit. In the middle of the talks, we had to reconcile President Farole of Puntland and the President Alain of Galmudug, because that very week their forces were fighting. And I managed to bring them. And I managed to convince them that the civil society must be included. So that is one optimism. Second, as I said, it is a rare consummation of commonality of purpose between the groundswell, the people of Somalia who want really to end the transition and to get the peace process moving, and the realization by these leaders who had always retreated and sought to prolong their stay. The Kampala Accord was not only to break the impasse, but to commit them to an undertaking for the roadmap. That is the second. The third, never before have there been compliance mechanisms, benchmarks, timelines, and mechanisms, which are at 3 levels. Based in Mogadishu, technical monitoring group, international in character, at a technical level. Monitoring group, international in character, based in Mogadishu and Nairobi. And for the first time, those who have been following the Burundi peace process, a regional initiative. For the first time, the heads of state and government of the IGAD countries and the East African community have agreed to provide political oversight over the roadmap, as they did in Burundi, when they told Egerton, you comply or else. This is it. The Security Council has sent a warning. Compliance with the roadmap, all future assistance will be contingent upon the compliance. We are talking of consequences. We are not waiving the consequences yet. But the Somali leadership knows that there are going to be consequences. But you don't apply conditionalities before you provide empower the implementation. So these are some of the issues that we hope to do. Why has Somaliland succeeded? Somaliland, to me, is a role model. Indeed, it is based on a clan, the Isak. But the rest of the Somalia, although predominantly, like Puntland is based on one clan, but they are mixed clans, Mogadishu, Kismayu, and all these places. So you cannot really rely entirely on one clan that is not necessarily coterminous with territory. In fact, clanism could be divisive, especially if it is in an area where there are mixed clans. But the reason why Somaliland is succeeding is because Somaliland has been inclusive. They have an upper house of elders. They have an elected house. They have arrangements of the various social groups that provide checks and balances. And this is what we are seeking through this inclusive politics. And in the constitutional process, we cannot avoid it. But everybody says, gone are the days of centralized authority in Somalia. The future of Somalia is in devolution of power, is in federalism, And this is what we seek to achieve out of the constitutional process. But a federalism and a devolution of power that is inclusive at the same time. It's a difficult exercise, but this is what we are seeking to achieve. The other question is the threat. In the split of Al-Shabaab, Mukhtar Robo is a liberal. In that he said international assistance to all places. Godane is a hardliner who said no, only selected. And that division goes deeper. In their disarray, Godane is now the leader of the East African branch. After Fazul, the organizer of the bombing of Dar es Salaam, Nairobi, died in Mogadishu, he is now the leader. He's no longer the leader of Shabab in Somalia. He is the leader of the East African Shabab. Recruitment is going on. Those who have died in the streets of Mogadishu are not only Somalis, they are Kenyans, they are Ugandans, they are Tanzanians, they are Americans, they are Canadians, they are Scandinavians. And the whole purpose of jihadism, you should understand, is a global agenda. And if Eastern Africa can be secured properly, the other area in West Africa, starting in Mauritania, and that whole bit of Algeria, is to link up in an arc. I think there are specialists here on international jihadism in Africa, but that is. In fact, if Somalia can be taken care of quickly, it will spare the others. On that score, of course, the international campaign, I think, has to be intensified. It is not a Somalia agenda only, it is an Eastern Africa and an African agenda. So it's really a threat. I agree with you.
So let's take another round, Warren, and then let's get some people back here in the room.
Warren Hogue, IPI. Augustine, I wanted to ask you about two comments you made in your opening statement. One is about the relative security of Mogadishu, which you said is the best it's been in 20 years. Does that mean the United Nations can now function at all from Mogadishu, or must you still do your work from your base in Nairobi? And the second question, sort of the same point, is about the diaspora. I remember a meeting here at IPI a year or two ago in which one of the points that was made was that that there is a large Somali diaspora, and that Somalis are very talented, and that Somalis do very well often in the countries they go to. And so my question is, these Somalis, are any of them coming back to stay, or must there be more assurances of security before you can woo them back?
Great. So, gentleman there on the aisle.
Walter Kemp, also from IPI. Just wondering if you can tell us a bit more about links between organized crime and some of the political groups in Somalia, particularly to do with revenues from piracy and Al-Shabaab, but other forms of organized crime as well.
I think his question was about moving your office. So somebody else would like to come in here and have a question? I certainly have some questions.
Piracy.
Please. Great.
Kathy.
Yeah, Kate, why don't you get up too and introduce yourself?
Hi, Kate Hunt from CARE International.
Closer.
Thank you very much for your
Closer,
presentation.
Kate.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Following up on the point about better security now in Mogadishu, clearly people are really anxious to help step up the humanitarian effort, which has been very difficult. I'd be interested in knowing how you see the next stage of the humanitarian effort within this security environment, such as it is for the moment.
Great. Terrific.
So my marching orders from the Secretary General was establish a light footprint in Mogadishu and Somalia. I'm telling the Secretary General that now I'm ready for a heavy footprint. The limitation is the security part of it, I think, is being taken care of. Although the withdrawal of Shabab does not mean that the terrorist threat has been eliminated. They are changing tactics. They are going into what they are best, terrorist tactics, urban warfare, side bombs, and explosive devices. But certainly the territory is much wider that we can operate now. And that's why I asked the Security Council last week for a guard force of 300 over and above the 12,000 troops that the Council has authorized to enable us to move around, of course, with all the cautions that is necessary and for static guard. But we are moving, and the limitation is just space. An hour ago, I was speaking to Mr. Gregory Stir that let him review the security requirements, the most compliance for my offices and accommodation so that more of us can be there. At any one time, I have 6 personnel from my office in Mogadishu, but there are more UN agencies and more who are going to Mogadishu. Every single building in Mogadishu, every single building has been destroyed. And without exception, you need extensive repairs. We can all be accommodated in the AMISOM base and at the airport, but we are crowded. We literally are queuing to be there. We are present in Puntland. My office established 15 staff were there. In Hargeisa, 15, where there was none a year ago. But we want more presence in Mogadishu. And certainly, I go to Mogadishu on the average every 10 days and stay there ranging from 1 night to 3 nights. So it's possible to go. The airport is out of rocket range, and certainly we are moving, and we have to go. Not only for the sake of presence, because the imperative of politics need to interact with the Somalis on a daily basis. You cannot operate out of Nairobi. There's no way you can do that. Which is linked to the humanitarian. Now, the humanitarian situation is compelling that you have to be there and help. But we are very mindful of neutrality and impartiality. Their movements cannot be linked to AMISOM. We have to find, in the broader secure atmosphere, other challenging ways of continuing to provide assistance. But there are 3 strategies for the humanitarian. The refugees, we must continue. Mogadishu, where out of the 6 districts, 1 is classified famine, is Mogadishu itself, because of IDPs who have arrived there. In 2 months, we have had an influx of 400,000 from the Shabab-controlled areas. Third is this buffer area, which is relatively easy to access, but is fraught with landmines and ordinances and infrastructure for humanitarian work that's going on. Fourth are these areas of stability, Puntland, Somaliland, where there is drought, but still there is no famine, but you need to provide humanitarian work. The most difficult is the still Shabab-controlled area in rural Somalia. The most effective organizations like WFP have been banned from operating there. There are a few selected ones that can still go there. MSF, UNICEF, Red Cross, Norwegian Council. But to monitor what is happening there is still a problem. Access is conditional, security is tenuous. And this is where our biggest challenge is. National staff who are working there, international staff, of course, the high-risk areas in the Shabab-controlled areas, but that is the nature of our work. We have to continue working, and that's how we're going. Piracy, I didn't exactly get it.
Okay, you want to ask your question again? I don't think either of us got your question clearly.
I was talking to John when you asked.
The question was about the links of revenue generated from piracy and how this has an effect on the political actors, and if there are clear links between certain piracy or other organized crime groups and Al-Shabaab, for example.
Mm-hmm. As I'm talking, there are 19 ships that have been held on the average for more than 12 months. And 400 people who are, no, actually 900 sailors who are held as hostages, and 400 Somalis who have gone unprosecuted. Some have gone into piracy a second or third time because there is no prosecution. Revenues are lucrative, ranging from 5 million a ship to 10 million, maybe more. If it's an oil tanker, they've been getting more. Our monitoring, United Nations monitoring group is now doing some work to trace the money. Where does the money go? Early indications show that the money doesn't, that which ends in Somalia is a fraction. The money ends elsewhere, outside Somalia, and in all continents. There are many beneficiaries to this. It has become an industry in league with drug and human trafficking. Piracy is probably the most lucrative, no taxation, very little risks, and very little overhead costs. You only need to feed a few people and you get your money. Just be patient. There have been speculations, but really on whether the money gets to some of the leaders the monitoring has become very, very tight, and we don't have that kind of evidence. Does the money go to the terrorists? That again, there hasn't been established, but they do levy, I think they levy taxes in the ports where there is a piracy infrastructure. By piracy infrastructure, I mean that is where the ships come to prepare, get the fuel before they go to sea, and they come while waiting to get ransom. They feed the people who have been, it's a very simple infrastructure. Some of the money, you'll be surprised. It really goes into squandering. I mean, there are young people who, there are speculations that a lot of money has gone into real estate in East Africa. We are tracing the money. In countries like Kenya, even Tanzania and all this. So we are really doing some homework. But these millions of dollars need to be understood. And there are bosses that are controlling this business. And the next challenge to the monitoring group is to trace the money and where it ends up. But it's really big business. And the deployment of the navies in the Indian Ocean, the highest concentration of naval aircraft, NATO and the European Union since the Second World War. With the 24 hours air surveillance, and these little boats are now pushing further south in the direction of Tanzania, Mozambique, and South Africa. Others are going further east with the motherships in the direction of India. But India has become very tough, so they are plying along the high seas. The situation has not been, the deterrence has not worked very well. Prosecutions, they're still bickering on whether they should be prosecuted in Somalia, or there should be a regional court, or they should be prosecuted in the other countries. We have not yet agreed. The Security Council is seized with this problem. But the problem and solution is on land, a political solution. And that is where law and order begins. And the others are really remedial measures. It is the political process that will provide a lasting solution to the problem of piracy off the coast of Somalia and now in the entire Indian Ocean.
I want to ask you two questions, Augustine, while all of you are thinking about the other questions you want to ask. One is you made a reference to the political support by the heads of state of IGAD and the EAC for the political process, but you've not spoken specifically about the position and policy of Ethiopia and Eritrea. And as we all know, Ethiopia, instigated by the Bush administration, actually attacked Somalia in about 2006, if I'm not mistaken, made matters by the lights of many people much worse, knocked out the Islamic courts, which at least some people thought, had a role to play, a more positive role to play. So I wonder about that, how you see Ethiopia's position. Have they committed themselves to a sort of a non-aggression policy, or are they kind of holding their options open? And then my second question, because you called Somaliland a success, which I also think is the case. I had the opportunity to visit there in 2001. I was very impressed by what you summarized here. However, as we know, neither the United Nations nor the African Union is prepared to recognize Somaliland as an independent country, member state. So what is your thought about that? Would it be desirable, given that they are a success, to accede to their desire to become a member state? Or are they somehow to be left hanging out without that opportunity? So I thought that we might, as far as you'd like to go. And then can we take one more? Okay. Please, the gentleman there.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm Thomas Wiklund from the Swedish Mission to the UN. Thank you so much, Mr. Mahiga, for being here and to brief us and discuss this important issue with us, and more importantly for your work for Somalia, not least with regard to the roadmap that was adopted recently. I think we would agree with what you've said, that it's an important step forward. The roadmap, for the same reasons that you've mentioned, it has ownership, benchmarks, timelines, and mechanisms. Still, it's obvious that the challenges are enormous. One important aspect is likely to be the extent that the TFG is able to do outreach and, if you will, sell the roadmap and the process to the broader Somali community. One important aspect here is also the work on the new constitution, which could be a blessing in disguise in a way, since it's part of the roadmap and obviously makes outreach a necessity. So I wonder what you see there when it comes to outreach to the broader Somali community. Do you see any strategy emerging on behalf of the TFG? Thank you.
Okay, from Joanna.
Joanna here. Then back to you.
Thank you, John. Joanna Weschler, Security Council report. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Mahiga, about the sanctions. Sanctions against Somalia have existed, I think, for the longest time of any current sanctions regimes imposed by the Security Council. And in the last couple of years, some new sanctions added on actors in Eritrea. There has been this summer a lot of talk about possibly expanding those sanctions. Is this the way to go? Is this something that you see as a useful and potentially promising tool?
On Ethiopia, academics who have written on military regimes in Africa, I'm sure have come up to see the regime of Siad Barre as a class in its own. in that it went on an expansion policy. The irredentism of the five-pointed star to redeem northern Kenya, the Ogaden, Djibouti, and of course, Somaliland and the southern Somalia. And the collapse of Siad Barre was precisely because of this irredentist and outward. Siad Barre was 40 kilometers from Ethiopia, from Addis Ababa, 40 kilometers. The Russians, the Americans said, stop there. Said, no, I have to occupy Addis Ababa. He had covered over 1,500 kilometers, had the best army, the biggest navy, the biggest air force after South Africa. The Cubans had been brought in from Angola, literally landing as they were fighting, and stopped and broke the back. They cut the Somali army, and it couldn't proceed any further. And that was the end of Siad Barre. The Ethiopians have never forgotten that. What the Islamic courts did, not only did they refuse to reconcile with the TFG formed in Nairobi, in Magati, but they threatened. They started a similar policy to reclaim the Ogaden. I don't know whether it was entirely the United States that said go, but I think the Ethiopians have never forgotten this. And they saw in the Islamic courts something that was dangerous. It reminded them of the 40 kilometers. But when the United Nations under my predecessor, Ould Abdallah, called the Djibouti Agreement, the ARS, the remnants of the Islamic courts, and the TFG, they came together through the Djibouti Agreement, the Ethiopians withdrew. And frankly, in my work, I've found the Ethiopians really tremendous allies in seeing the stability of Somalia. The policy of the African Union is defined by IGAD. And the biggest player in IGAD is Ethiopia. If you are talking of AMISOM today and all this, it is IGAD. IGAD decides, African Union endorses, believe me. So Ethiopia is a key player, but it is positive, and I count on them. The problem with Eritrea, as the sanctions debate here showed in the council, is that Eritrea had replayed their conflict. The replay is in Somalia, which is unfortunate. And I think, I don't want to go in the details, but the report of the Sanctions Committee did show the extent to which this, but surprising now Eritrea is coming around. Eritrea walked away from IGAD. A month ago, they walked in the Council of Ministers, and they said, no, you are not welcome. He said, no, I walked out, I'm walking in. But they said, no, this has to be decided by the heads of states. I was in Kampala when Isaias was in Kampala, and I said, President Museveni, can you ask them why they're not recognizing the Somali government? They said, tell Mr. Mahiga to continue with the roadmap. If it is inclusive enough, we shall recognize. I mean, there are new dynamics that are going on. So I'm looking for better days. Certainly, the Ethiopians are a key player because they have their national interest. But like anything else, the national interest of a neighbor is best in stability rather than chaos. When you don't like your neighbor, you can walk away and rent another house. But for a country, you cannot walk away. The stability of your neighbor is your stability. So I want to believe that Ethiopia has a vested interest in the stability of Somalia and vice versa. Somaliland, of course, is, as I said, is You know, Napoleon said, don't attack your enemy when he's retreating. Would it really be fair to break Somalia when it is sick? The position of the United Nations is for unity, territorial integrity, and sovereignty of Somalia. Let us fix the South Central. Then this issue can come later. If really the United Nations went in the history that we broke away Somaliland when the other part was mortally sick in an intensive care unit, we wouldn't go well in history. I think their successes can be a moral boost to the rest of it. Let them talk about it. Somaliland postponed its independence from Britain by a few months to wait for the independence of Somalia under the Italians in order to unite. And that's when they came to the United Nations as one country. It's more complex than Sudan, it is. So I have no answer immediately, but I think there are merits in buying time. They are very cooperative on issues like piracy, IDP movements, maritime resources. They work together, and certainly there's no hostility between the neighbors. So the potential for them deciding their future is there. I know in Somaliland, the talk of unification politically is a suicide. But it's an issue that I think the UN has too many on its plate to get involved at this stage. But we have to help Somaliland continue in the positive way like they are doing. Socio-economic assistance, humanitarian assistance, which has been going on. The dual policy of the United States does include Somaliland, assistance to Somaliland, and it has been replicated by other countries. Of course, Britain, as a former, has a special soft spot for Somaliland, so Somaliland is there. Recently, they visited China, Somaliland president. But when they got to traveling, the Chinese asked them a very simple question. What passports are you using? They said, we are using Somaliland passports. Oh, no, we don't recognize them. Oh, what passports can we use? They all ended up using their diaspora passports, British, American, and all this. Even the Chinese did not recognize. They said, you may come for development purposes, but in terms of international status, not yet. And this is the difference.
Let's see, was there one? I thought there was one other. You answered Joanna's question.
Joanne, I think
She just wondered about the continuing utility of
the sanctions on Somalia were arms sanctions, not to fuel the conflict. And that is where the sanctions are also applying to Eritrea. Because in that report, it shows that Eritrea has been used as a conduit for bringing in arms on behalf of something. And even countries supporting AMISOM and the TFG forces have to get an exemption from the sanctions committee. So that has worked to some extent, but of course, Somalia is awash with weapons. It hasn't succeeded. The kind of sanctions under what now we are calling consequences, the sanctions have never been applied on Somalis, spoilers to the peace process. Mm-hmm. The consequences may touch that part of it. And there is a clause in the mandate of the monitoring group that alludes to spoilers to the peace process. I think it is clause 22 in the mandate. I'm not quite sure. So that is a potential area where it can be the tools that can be used to ensure compliance against spoilers of the peace process, not only this.
So we have time for one or two more questions before we conclude, if anybody else would like to ask a question. And again, please identify yourself. So the lady right there.
Hi, my name is Nara Mansouri from UNDP. The monitoring group stresses that the peace process cannot exclude the business component, that the political process needs to kind of be linked to the business component, especially when you have the business procedures are more flexible in the Al-Shabaab controlled areas, taxes are lower. In general, it's more favorable to the population to operate in the Al-Shabaab controlled areas than it is in the TFGs. Can you please shed some light on how you are directly or indirectly trying to make that linkage when you're working with the TFG? Thank you.
Actually, Warren, I didn't answer your question about the entrepreneurial spirit of the Somalis. Right. No, they are in Africa. I mean, I know many entrepreneurial people. The Nigerians, the Somalis, maybe if you put them in one room, they can compare notes. The Somalis are highly entrepreneurial, and they're very successful wherever they are. And there are those who are already having, Somalia today, with all the chaos, has the most elaborate telecommunication system, is among the top 5 in Africa. How they do it, and it's the cheapest and the most efficient. You can call anywhere in the world, you go to Somalia. Right. You have problems calling from Nairobi or Dar es Salaam, not in Mogadishu. If I step out in 3 minutes, I go to transfer money. 3 minutes, the money is in Mogadishu. The most elaborate banking system. I don't know how they do it. There is a war economy that is going on around Kismayu. And the Shabab makes a lot of money out of that. We are discussing now on how to stop ships from going to Kismayu and just offload in Mogadishu because it is feeding on the Shabab. And I've been traveling to the diaspora. They are ready to go. And among the social groups I'm reaching out to as SRSG is the business community, to bring them around the TFG to work with the government. When Mogadishu was liberated, I got instructions from here 5 days later, when the Shabab walked away, that I should meet with the business community in Bakara market, which is the hub, and I did. And they came. And they met with me. And I said, I want you to revive Mogadishu. They said, give us 30 days, 90 days. You'll see vibrancy here. They're not joking. They can do it. But like all business people, there are those who profit from the war economy. There are those who are waiting for the longer term days. There are those who are afraid of the sanctions, so they are not coming up in the open. And that's why my strategy is to help them work with the government. But there is a lot of money in the diaspora. Today we are talking of famine. That society would have collapsed Somalia. You would have been seeing more corpses of dead people. But Somalia is the recipient of $1.5 billion a year from the diaspora. And that keeps the homesteads ticking. That's how vibrant the diaspora is. The humanitarian community has now to reckon with food vouchers. You pay the business people to give food to starving people because there is a business community. You tell them, go to Shabab controlled area. They say, I'll go. And they send food. That's the kind of risks Somalis can take. So it's really where they are. And frankly, with peace and stability in Somalia, Somalia could recover in less than 5 years. because that's how entrepreneurial the Somali business community is. And they need to be kept in the peace process rather than alienated. And they are afraid of sanctions. They are afraid of sanctions, so they wouldn't want to go on the wrong side of the United Nations Sanctions Committee. They want to be correct, because now they're looking in the future. And that's why they should be part of the peace process, and we're working around it.
Terrific. Well, you're absolutely right about the entrepreneurial class in Somalia, and when I was there in the 80s, that was another thing Siad Barre did wrong, was he discouraged them. But there was an effort by these people to come back. They stayed, or they've been there. Well, listen, it's been a fantastic hour and a half with you, and I really, on behalf of everybody here, want to thank you very, very much. First of all, for your insights, and then and your understanding, but also for this kind of encouraging portrait that you have given us of the possibilities that are here for a better Somalia. And certainly, I know everybody here agrees, we want to wish you personally and your staff and team a lot of great success in the challenge you meet ahead, and for the Somali people. So really thank you, Augustine, very, very much for being with us today.
Thank you, James.
Terrific.